Imagine you're driving down the highway
Hmm?
in the dead of winter, and you suddenly hit a patch of black ice.
Oh, that is just the most terrifying feeling in the world.
Right, it really is.
Ugh.
Your immediate visceral instinct, like the second you feel those tires lose their grip, is to just jerk the steering wheel as hard as you can in the opposite direction.
Mm.
You panic.
Exactly. You try to force that 2-ton piece of machinery back under your absolute control.
Yeah, and by overcorrecting, by frantically trying to prevent the crash, you actually guarantee that the car spins out. I mean, your desperate attempt to save yourself causes the exact disaster you were so terrified of.
It's a classic human response, though. We do it all the time.
We do this in our cars, and as we're going to explore today, we do this constantly in our lives, our careers, our relationships, you name it. So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are focusing entirely on a single, just incredibly potent piece of source text called The King Who Tried to Escape Truth.
It's a heavy title, but man, it delivers.
Oh, it really does. Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to explore a profound story that blends ancient myth with this razor-sharp breakdown of human behavior. Specifically, we're looking at how our attempts to control the future can utterly destroy our present.
What's fascinating here is that while this text features characters like King Kamsa and Krishna names you might actually recognize from ancient epics, the source explicitly warns us right from the start not to treat this as just a classic myth about good defeating evil.
Right, it's not just a fairy tale.
Exactly. Treating it like a fairy tale means you miss the psychological architecture underneath the whole thing. It lays out a very precise, highly observable pattern about fear, control, and the inevitable collapse of literally any system that's built on anxiety.
Wow.
Yeah, it functions more like like a diagnostic manual for human self-sabotage than a standard historical legend.
A diagnostic manual. I love that. So, to understand that pattern of collapse, we first have to look at the catalyst. The entire engine of this story starts with a single sentence that completely ruined a man who seemingly had everything.
Yeah, and that man is King Kamsa.
Right. We're introduced to King Kamsa, and the text establishes him as a man wielding absolute power. I mean, he has ultimate authority over a vast kingdom. He has endless resources, a heavily fortified position.
He's basically at the peak of the mountain.
Exactly. He's untouchable. But his reality shatters the moment he receives a prophecy. He is told, point blank, you will be killed by the child of your own bloodline.
Which is, I mean, we really need to pause on what a prediction like that actually does to the human brain.
Oh, totally.
Especially the brain of someone whose entire identity is built on invulnerability. Control is everything to him. A prophecy of doom acts like a cognitive virus. The source notes that from the exact second he hears that sentence, Kamsa stops being a king and becomes a prisoner of prediction.
A prisoner of prediction. That phrase it's the linchpin of his entire downfall.
It really is.
Because it's a total identity shift.
Oh.
A king governs the present, but a prisoner of prediction is entirely consumed by a hypothetical future. So he tightens his grip on the kingdom. He literally imprisons his own family.
Yeah, he locks them up.
He starts eliminating every possible threat before it can even mature. I mean, he dedicates his immense resources just to outthinking destiny. And you see this dynamic all the time in the modern world, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just ancient kings.
Right. Think about like a successful CEO who becomes so terrified of a theoretical market downturn that they pivot their entire company into this defensive crouch.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Yeah. They start micromanaging their top executives. They kill off innovative research and development just to hoard cash. And they end up creating a really toxic, paranoid culture.
And then what happens?
Well, eventually, they drive away all their top talent and engineer the exact bankruptcy they were trying to prevent, the black ice overcorrection.
Exactly. And the insidious nature of the illusion of control is that it always looks like it's working in the short term.
Oh, that is a great point.
Right. When that CEO tightens the budget, the spreadsheets temporarily look a lot cleaner. When Kamsa throws guards on every door and locks his family in dungeons, he gets immediate visible compliance. The palace looks secure.
But it's a facade.
Completely. The text highlights the hidden, fatal cost of this strategy. The more Kamsa tried to control the future, the more unstable his present became.
So what does this actually mean for his day-to-day existence? Because he wasn't actually ruling the kingdom anymore.
No, not at all. He was just managing his own anxiety on a macro scale. When you dedicate your primary resources, like your mental bandwidth, your physical energy, your emotional capital to fighting a hypothetical future event, you are actively starving your present reality of those exact same resources.
Wow. You're starving the present to fight the future.
Exactly. The mind cannot simultaneously nurture the present and wage a total war against the future. It just doesn't work. Kamsa's focus was so far out on the horizon, just anticipating the arrival of this child, that he became entirely blind to the rot spreading underneath his own throne.
Which brings us to the structural consequences of that fear. Because the source text doesn't just treat Counts' paranoia as, like, a bad mood, right?
Right.
It frames it as a cascading failure of structural integrity. The text outlines a very specific chain reaction here. So it starts with fear trying to control outcomes before they happen.
Hmm.
That refusal to accept uncertainty forces the mind to exert control. But that very attempt to control creates massive distortion in the present.
And distortion is really the operative word there. When you are terrified of a specific outcome, your brain essentially corrupts its own data.
It corrupts the data. How so?
Well, you force reality to fit your paranoid narrative. Kamsa stops seeing his family members as relatives and starts seeing them as potential assassins. You lose the ability to accurately assess risk because literally every shadow looks like the monster you were warned about.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting because I want to push back on the next phase of this collapse.
Yeah.
The text claims that this distortion actually weakens the internal structure.
Yeah, that's step 3.
Right. But if I'm Kamsa and I am hyper-aware of threats, shouldn't locking everything down and putting on thicker armor make me stronger? I mean, in my mind, building a massive defensive fortress, putting more guards on the walls, eliminating variables, that should make the structure impenetrable, not weak.
It seems like it would, sure, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at what armor and hypervigilance actually do to a living system over time.
Okay.
A fortress is only as strong as its foundation and its supply lines. If you build massive walls but you never maintain the foundation because you're too busy staring at the horizon looking for enemies, the sheer weight of the walls will eventually crush the structure.
Wow. The weight of the defense destroys the fortress.
Exactly. Kamsa's internal collapse happened long before any physical enemy ever arrived at his gates.
It's the biological cost of sustained tension. Like if you walk around for a week with your shoulders perpetually tense, anticipating a punch that hasn't landed yet.
Oh, you're going to be exhausted.
Right. The punch doesn't even need to knock you out. Your own muscle fatigue will drop you. The sheer caloric and neurological energy required to maintain a state of hypervigilance just breaks down the system. You get tension headaches, your immune system crashes, your back goes out.
And that's exactly what happens on a kingdom-wide scale. The structural integrity simply rots away from the inside. The distortion comes from building a life around avoiding a negative prediction rather than building a life firmly planted in reality.
So he's building on a phantom foundation.
Yeah. Kamsa spent decades draining the lifeblood out of his kingdom, alienating all his allies, and just exhausting his own mind, all to maintain a barricade against a ghost.
Man.
The collapse becomes inevitable, not because the enemy is so strong, but because the defense mechanism has completely hollowed out the host.
And because he had already collapsed internally, the actual physical confrontation that he spent his entire life dreading didn't require a massive army to defeat him.
No, it didn't.
It only required the arrival of something genuinely real, which introduces the counterforce in the text Krishna, the child he was so terrified of. The source gives us a striking, very deliberate contrast between these two figures.
It's a huge contrast.
Right. While Kamsa is suffocating his kingdom, sweating over prophecies inside a fortified palace, Krishna is growing up far, far away. The text explicitly notes he was not raised in power, and he was not raised in fear. He was raised in simplicity, play, and alignment.
And that environment of simplicity and play is the absolute antithesis of rigid, paranoid control.
Totally.
Krishna didn't grow up with the intention of exacting revenge. I mean, if his entire development had been driven by the anticipation of fighting Kamsa, he would just be the other side of the same anxious coin.
Oh, that's a great point. He would be just as distorted.
Exactly. He would be another character living in the future. Instead, the text uses a very specific, profound concept to describe Krishna's development. He grew in coherence.
Coherence. I love thinking about that word mechanistically.
Yeah.
Like in physics, coherence is what happens when waves move in perfect synchronization, like a laser.
Right, they align perfectly.
Yeah, they don't waste any energy crashing into each other. They move seamlessly, creating this concentrated power. So Kamsa is a million scattered, frantic light bulbs just burning themselves out, and Krishna is the laser.
I love that analogy.
It makes me think of water breaking through a completely rotten dam. The water doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't need an explosive charge. The quiet, inevitable, coherent pressure of reality just washes the weakness away.
Yeah.
The dam is already structurally compromised by its own rigidity, so the water merely exposes the truth of that weakness. So what does this all mean for the climax of the story? The arena is full, Combs is watching from above, insulated by his lifetime of obsessive strategy, surrounded by layers of what the text calls illusion.
And then Krishna steps forward.
Right. And the text describes him as calm, certain, already complete. How does that concept of coherence neutralize Combs's lifetime of strategy?
Well, this raises an important question about how we fundamentally view conflict. We are heavily conditioned to believe that overcoming a massive, entrenched power requires an equally massive, explosive counterforce.
Like a movie, we expect a 20-minute cinematic battle scene with clashing swords and explosions.
Exactly. But the text zeroes in on its most powerful observation right here, and it's a quote, "Truth does not argue, it resolves."
Truth not argue, it just arrives.
Yes, Krishna didn't storm the kingdom with rage because truth operates on a completely different frequency than fear. Truth doesn't need to engage with the frantic, exhausting noise of anxiety.
It just cuts right through it.
It really does. The text describes how Kamsa's strongest fighters, his elaborate distractions, his decades of layered defense, they simply fell away. They were rendered entirely irrelevant.
Because you cannot out-strategize reality.
No, you can't. When a person is living inside a massive, complex defense mechanism against the truth, the mere presence of simple, unbothered reality is devastating.
So Krishna pulls Kamsa from the throne, and the text emphasizes that the fall was instant. It was both physical and symbolic, but the speed of it is what really matters.
The speed is everything.
It was instant because Kamsa had already done the exhaustive work of defeating himself. The structure was completely dead. Truth just walked in and swept away the dust.
It's a profound recalibration of how we see strength. I mean, true power in this narrative isn't the ability to manipulate the future. It's the capacity to remain incredibly grounded in the present.
Grounded in the present, right.
Krishna's lack of anticipation meant he had 100% of his cognitive and physical resources available for the exact moment he was in. Tamsa had almost none.
Because his resources were all trapped in the future. Understanding this ancient clash is fascinating, but it is only valuable to you, the listener, if you can use it to recognize where you are playing the role of Kamsa in your own life. Like, where are we wasting our finite energy in this exact same feedback loop?
Right, because the source isn't just a philosophical meditation. It's a highly practical diagnostic tool.
It really is. It explicitly lays out what we need to stop doing. It says we have to stop over-controlling situations to avoid theoretical outcomes. We have to stop fighting what hasn't actually happened yet. And we have to stop building the architecture of our lives around fear-based predictions.
Which is an incredibly tall order, considering our brains are evolutionary prediction machines.
Oh, for sure. We're fighting biology.
We really are. We are biologically hardwired to anticipate threats to keep ourselves alive. The leap from basic survival to Kamsa-level self-sabotage happens when we let the prediction overwrite the present reality.
So we know the trap, and we know our brains naturally want to spring it. Based on the text, what is the ultimate rule? Like, how do we actively break the loop? How do we shift into that state of coherence so we aren't engineering our own downfall?
The shift requires a fundamental change in your focal point. The text instructs us to act from alignment, not anticipation.
Alignment, not anticipation.
Yeah. Practically, that means making decisions based on what is demonstrably true and directly in front of you right now, rather than making decisions based on a terrifying scenario you've imagined 3 steps down the road. You have to stabilize your present instead of obsessing over the future.
Let's make the mechanics of that real for a second. Let's use an analogy. Imagine you're in a relationship and you suddenly develop a profound fear that your partner is going to leave you. That becomes your prophecy.
A very common prophecy, unfortunately.
Right. And if you adopt Kamsa's strategy, you try to outthink the prophecy.
Yeah.
You start checking their phone, you demand constant reassurance, you analyze every slight change in their tone of voice, you exert control to prevent the abandonment.
And by doing so, you introduce massive distortion into the relationship. Your hypervigilance becomes exhausting for everyone involved.
You suffocate the partner. The distortion and the control ruin the foundation of trust, which eventually drives the partner away. You literally cause the prophecy to come true through your defense mechanisms.
The black ice.
Yes. But if you act from coherence, the strategy completely flips. You acknowledge the fear, but you say, I cannot control the future of this relationship. What I can control is being a loving, present, supportive partner today.
You focus all your energy on stabilizing the present.
Exactly. You refuse to feed the anxiety, and by remaining coherent, you build a foundation that actually has a chance of lasting. You let go of the steering wheel on the black ice, allowing the tires to find their natural grip again, instead of forcing a catastrophic correction.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text distills this entire dynamic into one ultimate synthesized rule. It delivers the core principle that governs this whole psychological mechanism.
What's the rule?
The text states, what you try to suppress through fear becomes the force that ends you. What you allow and align with becomes the force that stabilizes you.
What you try to suppress through fear becomes the force that ends you. Wow, that perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of the Kamsa loop.
It really does.
The energy you spend suppressing the fear actually feeds it, growing it into the very monster that tears down your walls.
It is the ultimate warning against living defensively. A defensive life is a fragile life. An aligned life is a resilient one.
Well, we've covered some immense psychological territory today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of fear, truth, and coherence. We've explored how King Kamsa's desperate, white-knuckled grip on control was the actual architect of his destruction.
A self-fulfilling prophecy in the truest sense.
Absolutely. And we've seen how Krishna's simple, coherent alignment with reality was the only force needed to resolve a lifetime of paranoia. The key takeaway here is that true structural strength doesn't lie in your ability to wrestle the future into submission, but in your capacity to stabilize the present moment.
The profound relief hidden in this text is the realization that truth doesn't need us to fight for it. And it certainly doesn't need us to build fortresses to protect it. It just requires us to stop building walls against it.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent our time analyzing how Kamsa became a prisoner of a prophecy that was spoken to him by an external force. But as you go about your week, as you drive your car, manage your projects, and navigate your relationships, ask yourself, what if the most dangerous prophecies aren't the dramatic ones handed to us by destiny or circumstance? What if the most destructive prophecies of all are the fearful predictions we quietly whisper to ourselves every single day? Remember, when you feel the wheels start to slip, don't jerk the steering wheel. Relax your grip, breathe into the present, and let the truth resolve.